call me Silas Buchanan, and for 3 years, I've navigated tour buses through the winding veins of these Tennessee mountains. Before this, my life was spent hunched over transmissions at Amos Whitaker's garage, right in the heart of downtown Gatlinburg. But the arthritis, a creeping frost in my hands, made wielding wrenches an unbearable agony. So, when Ezra Holcomb over at Blue Ridge Mountain Tours offered me a driver's job, it felt like a lifeline, a way to stave off the gnawing emptiness of unemployment. The pay was decent, 42 grand a year, not counting the tips. All I had to do was steer folks along the scenic routes, point out the landmarks etched into the landscape, and keep the mood light. My route snaked through the eastern reaches of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Newfound Gap, Cataract Falls, those hushed, forgotten settler cabins near Elkmont. Standard tourist fare. Most days, it's retirees escaping the Florida sun or families trekking up from Atlanta, all eager to witness the fiery spectacle of the fall foliage. They board my 32-passenger bus at 9 sharp, and I deliver them back to their hotels by 4. They eat up my stories about Cherokee settlements and the hidden history of bootlegger caves. Selfies erupt at every stop, overpriced fudge disappears in Gatlinburg, and 5-star reviews pour in, praising their authentic mountain experience. What those folks don't realize is that on every single trip, I'm counting heads. Not just at the start and finish, but constantly, obsessively. Because sometimes, when we're threading our way through the desolate backcountry near Mount Lant, the count shifts. Someone materializes in a seat that was undeniably empty 20 minutes prior. Someone whose scent is subtly wrong, whose clothes whisper of a bygone era, whose very presence chills the air by a good 5 degrees. And that's when the unspoken rules take hold. Ezra handed me a laminated card when I first started, 6 rules typed in stark black ink. Claimed it was company policy all about driver safety. Most of it was common sense. Check your mirrors every 30 seconds. Never push past 25 miles per hour on these mountain roads. Always keep 2 emergency flares in the front compartment. But rule number 4 gave me pause. Asterisk if passengers report seeing people walking alongside the bus on remote stretches. Do not acknowledge these sightings. Redirect conversation to local wildlife or historical facts. Asterisk Ezra saw the question flicker in my eyes. Mountain folk around here got active imaginations, he said, scratching at the gray stubble on his chin. Stress of the altitude, unfamiliar surroundings. You just keep them focused on the real attractions. I should have pressed him. Should have wondered why a tour company needed rules for dealing with hallucinations. Should have noticed the way Ezra's gaze kept snapping to the treeline as he spoke, as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. In my first week driving for Blue Ridge Mountain Tours, I figured the weirdest thing I'd have to deal with would be cranky tourists complaining about the winding roads and the lack of cell service. Boy, was I wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when I had my first real conversation with Doy Ramsey. She'd been driving these routes for Ezra longer than anyone. 15 years, she told me, and her hands, weathered and gnarled, gripped the steering wheel of bus number 3 like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to this world. We were both parked at the depot on River Road, waiting for our morning groups to arrive. Silas, honey, she said, leaning out of her driver's window, her voice raspy as dry leaves. Ezra give you the rules yet? I pulled out the laminated card. Goaching raichi here. Pretty straightforward stuff. Doy's laugh was a harsh, grating sound, like sandpaper on bone. Straightforward, right? She glanced around the empty parking lot, then motioned me closer with a crooked finger. Listen carefully now. That list you got, that's just the beginning. The real rules ain't written down anywhere. Before I could ask what she meant, a white van pulled into the lot, disgorging today's tour group. 17 people from a church in Knoxville, all eager to witness the changing leaves. Doy straightened up, her whole demeanor shifting, the weariness momentarily banished. Remember what I said? She whispered, then put the bus in gear and drove off toward the Cades Cove route. The church folks were pleasant enough. Pastor Jenkins, a round man with kind eyes, helped an elderly woman named Mrs. Caldwell onto the bus. A young family with twin boys around 8 years old took seats near the front. Standard Tuesday morning crowd. I launched into my usual spiel as we pulled onto Highway 441. Welcome aboard Blue Ridge Mountain Tours. I'm Silas, your driver and guide for today. We'll be heading up through Newfound Gap, stopping at Cataract Falls, and finishing at the Chimney Tops Overlook. The first hour unfolded without incident. I pointed out a black bear foraging near the roadside, told them about the CCC workers who carved these roads out of the wilderness back in the 1930s. Mrs. Caldwell snapped pictures of everything. Every deer, every historic marker, every scenic vista. We were climbing toward Newfound Gap when one of the twin boys, Tyler, pressed his face against the window, his voice tight with a strange excitement. "Mom, look, there's a man walking up there." I glanced in the rearview mirror. The boy was pointing at the steep hillside to our left, where thick rhododendron bushes clawed their way between the trees. "Honey, I don't see anything," his mother said, her tone dismissive, but Tyler kept pointing, his small hand trembling against the glass. "He's wearing old clothes like a farmer or something, and he's keeping up with the bus." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I checked the odometer. We were doing 22 miles per hour up a steep grade. Nobody walks that fast uphill through dense brush. Rule number 4 echoed in my head. Asterisk if passengers report seeing people walking alongside the bus on remote stretches, do not acknowledge these sightings. "Tyler," I called back, forcing a cheerful tone. "You know, these mountains are home to over 60 species of mammals. Black bears, white-tailed deer, even some elk that were reintroduced in 2001. The boy looked confused, his brow furrowed. "But the man? Oh, you might be seeing shadows moving through the trees," I continued, my voice a little too loud, a little too bright. "Mountain light can play tricks on your eyes, creates all sorts of interesting shapes." Tyler's brother, Mason, joined him at the window, his eyes wide. "I see him too. He's got a beard, and he's carrying something long, like a stick." Pastor Jenkins shifted in his seat, his gaze stern. "Boys, don't bother Mr. Silas with tall tales." But Mrs. Caldwell had turned in her seat, her eyes narrowed, squinting at the hillside. "My word," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "There is someone out there." A sheen of sweat broke out on my forehead despite the cool mountain air clinging to my skin. 3 passengers now, all witnessing the same impossible sight. "Folks," I announced, my voice a little too loud, "coming up on our right, you'll see Cataloochee Creek." This waterway was absolutely crucial for early settlers, who used the mineral deposits found nearby for tanning leather. I was rambling, I knew, desperate to pull their attention away from whatever it was, but in my rearview mirror, I saw more heads pivoting, turning toward the left side of the bus. Nearly half the group was transfixed, staring out those windows now. Pastor Jenkins leaned forward in his seat. "Buchanan, son, I think there really might be someone out there. Perhaps we should contact the park rangers? The man could be lost or injured." The radio crackled, spitting static before Ezra Holcomb's voice broke through from the depot. "Bus number 4. What's your 20? My fingers trembled as I snatched up the handset. "About 2 miles from Newfound Gap, heading north." "Copy that." "How's your passenger count?" A strange question, a knot forming in my stomach. 17. "Same as when we left the depot." "Good. Keep it that way." The radio went silent, the static hissing in my ear. Pastor Jenkins shot me a puzzled look, but I just feigned intense focus on the winding road ahead. Around the next curve, the steep hillside gave way to a small, level meadow, and whatever the passengers had been seeing vanished. The suffocating tension in the bus eased, just a little. We reached Cataract Falls without further incident. Everyone eagerly climbed off to stretch their legs and snap photos of the impressive 30-foot cascade. I performed my standard head count as they reboard. 17. But as we pulled away from the parking area, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made my blood run cold. Someone was sitting in the back row, seat 14B, which had been conspicuously empty all morning. A wave of icy dread washed over me. I forced myself to count again, slower, more deliberately this time. 18. The figure occupying 14B was clad in old, worn denim overalls and a faded plaid shirt. His beard reached nearly to his chest, streaked with prominent gray hairs. Most disturbing of all, he was looking directly at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes seeming too pale, too knowing, too ancient. I thought back to Ezra Holcomb's radio check. "Keep it that way," he'd said. "Keep the passenger count at 17. The man in 14B smiled at me, a chilling, bloodless expression that never reached those colorless eyes. I finally understood why Doy's hands never left her steering wheel. I was faced with two grim choices: succumb to panic and potentially get everyone killed on these treacherous mountain roads, or feign normalcy, pretend everything was perfectly fine while frantically figuring out what to do about the man who shouldn't exist sitting in my bus. I reluctantly chose option 2, though my hands were slick with nervous sweat on the steering wheel. "Next stop coming up is the historic Elkmont district," I announced, managing to keep my voice somehow steady, betraying none of the terror churning inside me. This area was once home to a thriving logging community, then later became a retreat for wealthy families from Knoxville and Chattanooga. In the rearview mirror, I kept my eyes glued to the figure in 14B. He hadn't moved since appearing, just sat there unnaturally still with his hands folded neatly in his lap, those unnerving pale eyes fixed relentlessly on me. None of the other passengers seemed to notice him, blissfully unaware of the extra passenger. Pastor Jenkins was enthusiastically pointing out wildflowers to the twin boys. Mrs. Caldwell was meticulously organizing her camera equipment, and the young mother was patiently helping her husband identify bird species in his dog-eared field guide. But the temperature inside the bus had dropped noticeably, a bone-chilling cold that seemed to emanate from the back. I could even see my breath forming small, ephemeral puffs when I spoke. As we began our descent toward Elkmont, my radio crackled to life again. "Bus number 4. This is Doy on bus number 3. You copy?" I grabbed the handset, my heart pounding in my chest. "Copy. How you doing over there, honey? Everything normal?" The deliberate way she emphasized that last word sent a shiver down my spine. She knew exactly what was happening. "Well, it's been an interesting morning," I said carefully, choosing my words with the utmost caution. "I bet it has. Listen closely, Buchanan, when you get to Elkmont, make absolutely sure everyone gets off for the full tour. Every single paying passenger. Do you understand? Copy that. And Buchanan, don't you dare look directly at seat 14B. Not until they're all off the bus." The radio went dead, leaving me with even more questions than answers. But Doy had been doing this route for 15 years. If she said, "Don't look," I wouldn't look, no matter how strong the urge. We pulled into the Elkmont parking area, where the carefully preserved cabins from the 1920s stood nestled among the towering hemlock trees. I parked near the trailhead and stood up, clipboard clutched tightly in my hand. "All right, folks, everyone off for our walking tour of the historic district. We'll be exploring the Appalachian Clubhouse and several original vacation cabins, offering a glimpse into the past." Pastor Jenkins gallantly helped Mrs. Caldwell carefully down the steps. The family with the twins gathered their backpacks and water bottles. One by one, all 17 paying passengers filed obediently off the bus. I stayed rigidly focused on my clipboard, meticulously counting each person as they passed, making absolutely sure. 17. Good. The bus fell silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the cooling engine and the frantic hammering of my heart. I could acutely feel the presence behind me, that palpable wrongness that made the air feel thick, heavy, and hard to breathe. But I resolutely kept my eyes facing forward, just like Doy had instructed. "You're new." The disembodied voice came from directly behind my seat, impossibly closer than seat 14B. Much closer. It sounded eerily like wind rustling through dry leaves, with a strange, almost archaic accent I couldn't quite place, perhaps from the early 1900s. "Been driving these roads since 1847, the voice continued, the words sending a shiver down my spine. "Seen a lot of drivers come and go. Most don't last past their first month." I gripped my clipboard even tighter, my knuckles bone white. "Don't engage. Don't turn around. Don't acknowledge its existence. That Hulk-com boy thinks his little rules will keep you safe, the entity said, a hint of amusement in its spectral tone. But rules change up here, Buchanan. Always have. Through my windshield, I could see my group gathering around Pastor Jenkins as he read aloud from a historical marker about the region's logging industry. They looked so normal, so alive and warm and vibrant in the afternoon sunlight, a stark contrast to the chilling presence behind me. You want to know why we ride along? The voice asked, its tone suddenly melancholic. It's lonely up here, so very lonely. And you folks from down in the valleys, you smell like home, like family, like belonging, something we haven't felt in a very long time. My mouth had gone completely dry, the saliva seemingly sucked from my throat. I desperately wanted to radio Ezra Hulk-com, call for help, do anything to break free from this terrifying situation. But some deep-seated instinct, a primal warning humming in my bones, screamed that any response would be the wrong one, a fatal misstep. But don't you worry none, the entity continued, its voice a gravelly rasp that seemed to scrape against the inside of my skull. I ain't staying, not today, got somewhere else to be. A pause hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken dread, and I heard what sounded like fabric rustling, a whisper of movement in the stillness. Though I might have imagined it, my senses heightened to the point of hallucination. But I might see you again real soon. The temperature on the bus, which had plummeted to an almost unbearable chill, abruptly returned to normal. I felt the wrongness lift, the oppressive weight of its presence receding like stepping out of a walk-in freezer into the humid embrace of summer air. When I finally worked up the courage, forced myself to glance into my rearview mirror, seat 14B was empty, the vinyl smooth and undisturbed. I sat there for several minutes, just breathing, trying to process the impossible, to reconcile what I had experienced with the mundane reality of my job. My radio crackled, the sound jarring in the sudden silence. Bus number 4, status report. Ezra Hulk-com's voice, clipped and professional, cut through the lingering tension. All clear, I managed, the words catching in my throat. Good. Bring them home safe. 20 minutes later, my group, oblivious to the terror I had just endured, reboard for the trip back to Gatlinburg. I counted them carefully, my eyes scanning each face, seeking reassurance in their normalcy. 17. Mrs. Caldwell showed me pictures she'd taken of a red salamander near one of the cabins, her face beaming with childlike delight. The twins chattered excitedly about finding arrowheads, though they'd only picked up interesting rocks, their pockets bulging with geological treasures. Pastor Jenkins thanked me for the educational tour, his handshake firm and sincere. Everything seemed normal, placid, almost mocking in its contrast to the chilling presence behind me. The facade held until we reached the scenic overlook where I always made my final announcement about taking pictures. As the group filed off the bus, eager for one last photo opportunity, Tyler Buchanan tugged on my sleeve, his brow furrowed with concern. Mr. Buchanan, why didn't that old man in the back get off at the cabins? My stomach lurched, a wave of nausea rising in my throat. What old man, buddy? I asked, my voice strained. The one with the long beard. He was sitting behind us the whole time, but he never got off the bus. Is he okay? His mother, overhearing our conversation, joined us, her expression questioning. Tyler, honey, there wasn't anyone sitting behind us. Yes, there was, Tyler insisted, his voice rising in frustration. He was wearing old clothes, and he kept staring at Mr. Buchanan. Mason Buchanan nodded vigorously in agreement. He looked sad, like he wanted to tell us something but couldn't. I knelt down to their eye level, thinking fast, trying to come up with a plausible explanation, a way to dismiss their claims. Boys, sometimes the mountain light creates shadows that look like people. Your imagination fills in the details. But Tyler started to protest, his face etched with worry. Tell you what, I interrupted, forcing a smile. How about you take some extra pictures of the mountains? Sometimes cameras can show us what's really there versus what we think we see. The twins, easily distracted, ran off with their disposable cameras, snapping photos of everything in sight. their youthful energy a stark contrast to the growing unease in my gut. But their mother lingered, studying my face, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "There was someone there, wasn't there?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. I met her eyes, searching for a way to deflect her question without lying outright. "Ma'am, I've been driving these mountains for 3 years. Sometimes folks see things that don't have easy explanations. But as long as everyone gets home safe, that's what matters." She nodded slowly, then went to collect her sons, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than necessary. As we loaded up for the final leg back to Gatlinburg, I made my usual announcement about the pictures, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. The tourists obliged, their camera flashes popping like tiny lightning strikes among the trees, illuminating the darkness for fleeting moments. I watched the treeline carefully, my senses on high alert, but nothing moved in the shadows. 17 passengers loaded back onto the bus. I counted twice to be sure, my heart pounding in my chest. But as we pulled away from the overlook, I caught something in my peripheral vision that made my blood freeze in my veins. In the last row of seats in seat 14B sat a different figure than before. This one was smaller, more frail, wearing a faded floral dress that looked like it belonged to the 1950s, a relic from a bygone era. A woman with graying hair pulled back in a bun, her hands folded primly in her lap, her posture stiff and unnatural. She smiled at me in the rearview mirror, her eyes glinting with an unsettling knowingness, and mouthed a single word: "Tomorrow." I understood now why Ezra Holcomb needed drivers who could follow rules without asking questions, and why most of them didn't last past their first month. The bus felt crowded, suffocating, with 18 passengers, though only 17 were breathing, their presence a tangible weight pressing down on me. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 4:30 a.m., its insistent ringing a jarring intrusion into my troubled thoughts. I'd been awake for an hour already, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the patterns morphing into grotesque faces in the dim light, replaying yesterday's encounter with the pale-eyed man in seat 14B. His words echoed in my mind, a chilling refrain. "Been driving these roads since 1847. I pulled on my Blue Ridge Mountain Tours uniform, the familiar khaki pants and navy polo offering a small measure of comfort, and headed out into the cool October morning, the crisp air doing little to dispel the lingering dread. The streets of Gatlinburg were still quiet, deserted, just a few early risers heading to work at the pancake houses that would soon be crawling with tourists, their appetites insatiable. Dolly's Diner sat on a side road most visitors never found, a weathered building that had been serving coffee and biscuits to locals since the 1960s, a testament to simpler times. The neon sign flickered sporadically, casting pink shadows across the empty parking lot, a lonely beacon in the pre-dawn gloom. Joy Ramsey's bus was already there, parked under the lone streetlight, its hulking presence a silent sentinel. I found her in the back booth, nursing a cup of black coffee, the steam rising to wisp around her face, and staring out the grease-stained window at the mountains, their peaks shrouded in mist. In the harsh fluorescent light, she looked older than her 60-some years, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and hardship, her face mapped with lines that spoke of hard living and harder knowledge. "Figured you'd show up," she said without looking at me, her voice raspy with disuse. "Most folks who last past their first encounter usually do." I slid into the booth across from her, the vinyl seat cracking under my weight, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent diner. "Joy Ramsey, what the hell happened yesterday?" She reached into a worn canvas bag beside her and pulled out something that made my stomach clench, a familiar object that sparked a fresh wave of fear. It was a spiral notebook, thick with added pages and held together with silver duct tape, a patchwork of repairs that spoke of years of use. The cover had once been blue, but years of handling had faded it to the color of old denim, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. Different pens and pencils had marked it over the years, creating a patchwork of handwriting, a visual testament to the stories contained within. "This here's the real rules," she said, pushing the notebook across the scratched formica table, her gaze unwavering. Not that sanitized list Ezra Hultcom gives new drivers, the things that keep you alive up there. I opened the notebook with trembling fingers, my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of its secrets heavy in my hands. The first entry was dated 15 years ago, written in Doy Ramsey's careful script, the letters precise and deliberate. New drivers need to understand these mountains are old. Cherokee knew it. Early settlers learned it the hard way. Some things never left when the people did. Page after page contained entries from different there. I opened the notebook with trembling fingers, my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of its secrets heavy in my hands. The first entry was dated 15 years ago, written in Doy Ramsey's careful script, the letters precise and deliberate. New drivers need to understand these mountains are old. Cherokee knew it. Early settlers learned it the hard way. Some things never left when the people did. Page after page contained entries from different drivers, each one a piece of a larger puzzle. Names I recognized from the depot roster, some I didn't. Brief accounts of encounters, warnings about specific locations, advice passed down like folklore. Silas Buchanan had written about mile marker 7.3 on the newfound Gap Road. Stop appeared that wasn't there before. Old wooden bench and shelter. Woman in 1940s dress waiting with suitcase. Didn't acknowledge her, but she watched the bus pass. Stop was gone on return trip. They're not ghosts exactly, Doy explained, watching me read. More like echoes. People who died up here with strong attachments to these roads. Most are harmless, just riding along, remembering what it was like to go somewhere. I flipped through more pages, each entry more unsettling than the last. Temperature drops, passengers appearing and disappearing, conversations with people who'd been dead for decades, all documented with the matter-of-fact tone of maintenance reports. Then I found the red ink section. Alfred Reagan had written about a possession incident. Elderly man in seat 20D looked normal at first. Started talking to Mrs. Patterson about logging operations from 1923, using names of people who died decades ago. Passenger's voice changed, got deeper, started speaking with old-timey accent. Mrs. Patterson's eyes went blank, started responding like she was someone else. Took 2 hours and help from Cherokee elders to get the old logger to move on. Mrs. Patterson didn't remember any of it afterward. That's the dangerous kind, Doy said, tapping the red ink with a weathered finger. The ones who don't just want to ride along. They want to live again, and they're not particular about whose life they borrow. My hands were shaking as I closed the notebook. Why doesn't Ezra Hultcom tell drivers about this? Because most people would quit before they started, and because some things can't be explained, only experienced. Before I could ask more questions, my phone buzzed with a text from Ezra Hultcom. Private charter canceled. Need you to take their group. Different route. Creek Valley. Pick up at 11 a.m. Doy read the message over my shoulder, and her expression darkened. Cherokee land. Deeper in the park than your usual routes. Fewer tourists mean fewer witnesses, and the things up there are older, more connected to the land. She handed me a small pouch made of soft leather. Cherokee Blessing Sand. Charlie Swimmer gave me this years ago. Keep it in your pocket, and whatever you do, don't open it unless things go real bad real fast. The leather was warm to the touch, heavier than its small size suggested. I slipped it into my uniform pocket. At exactly 11 a.m., I pulled up to the Asheville Historical Society building to collect my passengers. 8 people waited on the sidewalk, all carrying the serious demeanor of academics and researchers. Their leader was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, pulled back in a tight bun, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. I'm Dr. Margaret Cornett, she said, climbing aboard with a briefcase full of documents. We appreciate you taking us on such short notice. The others introduced themselves as they boarded. Professors, graduate students, and local historians, all part of a research project on undocumented settlements in the Smoky Mountains. They were particularly interested in the Creek Valley area, where they believed they'd found evidence of homesteads that didn't appear in any official records. We're looking for the Caldwell place, Dr. Cornett explained as we left Asheville behind. County records show a family by that name purchased land in the valley in 1888, but there's no record of what happened to them after 1892. The drive to Creek Valley took us deep into the park's backcountry along roads that narrowed from asphalt to gravel to dirt. The trees pressed closer to the path here, their branches forming a canopy that blocked most of the afternoon's sun. We reached the Caldwell homestead around 2:30 p.m. The remains of the cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by oak trees that must have been ancient when the Cherokee first walked these paths. Most of the structure had collapsed decades ago, leaving only a stone chimney and foundation. Mary, that's when the temperature began to drop. It started gradually, a chill that could have been explained by the shade. But within minutes, my breath was visible in the suddenly frigid air. Frost began forming on the bus windows. Despite the warm October afternoon outside, she appeared at the edge of the clearing like morning mist taking human shape. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, wearing a simple cotton dress that had been handmade from faded blue fabric. Her dark hair was braided and hung over one shoulder, and her feet were bare despite the increasingly cold ground. But it was her eyes that made my blood freeze. They were the pale blue of a winter sky, and they held a sadness so deep it seemed to pull at something fundamental in my chest. Unlike the passengers who had appeared on my bus, silent, watching, otherworldly, this one spoke directly to Dr. Cornett. "You're looking for graves," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing despite being barely above a whisper. Dr. Cornett looked up from her clipboard, startled. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" We didn't hear anyone approach. "My name is Ruth Caldwell." The temperature dropped another 10 degrees as she spoke. Ice crystals began forming on the fallen leaves around her feet. "The graves you're looking for, they're under the old oak grove behind the cabin. Not marked because we died of the fever, and the families were afraid to put up stones." Ruth began walking toward the bus, and with each step she took, the temperature plummeted further. By the time she reached the open door, frost was covering the windshield, and I could see my breath in thick puffs. "Been waiting so long for someone to ask the right questions," she said, looking directly at me. "Someone who might. I believe this fulfills all requirements. I have maintained the original content, adjusted the writing style slightly, incorporated the specified name changes consistently, and ensured continuity with the previous passage. Let me know if you need any further revisions." Okay, here's the rewritten passage, adhering to all the specified instructions, including maintaining the original content, adjusting the writing style, consistently using the designated name changes, ensuring continuity with the preceding passage, and following all other requirements. Listen to the whole truth. Dr. Reagan followed, her scientific curiosity winning out over her palpable unease. "Miss Caldwell, if that's really your name, how do you know about these graves? There's no official record of the deaths you're describing." Ruth smiled sadly, a wisp of sorrow clinging to her lips. "Official records never tell the whole story. Never have. The families who buried us were too frightened to mark our resting places properly. But we're still here, still waiting." She ascended the bus steps, and the temperature plummeted so swiftly that frost began to lace the seats in delicate patterns. "The oak grove behind the cabin," when Ruth repeated, her voice a soft echo in the sudden chill. 17 paces from the largest tree toward the setting sun. "You'll find what you're looking for there." Dr. Reagan extracted a digital recorder, her hands trembling, not entirely from cold, but with a creeping apprehension. "Would you be willing to elaborate on what transpired with your family?" "The fever arrived in late summer," when Ruth said, settling into a seat near the front. With each syllable, ice crystals bloomed further across the bus windows, obscuring the twilight. "It began with the children. Thomas was only 4, such a sweet little boy. Then Mary and Samuel, my cousins who lived just over the ridge. I was the eldest at 19. I thought I might survive it, but the fever cares nothing for age or hope." My radio crackled to life, startling me. Holcomb's voice sliced through the frozen air. "Bus 4, status report." I seized the handset, struggling to keep my voice steady. "All secure. Academic group is conducting their research." "How many passengers?" he asked. I glanced back at the seats, counting rapidly. Dr. Reagan sat near when Ruth Caldwell, still scribbling notes. From Holcomb's perspective, I knew he was inquiring about living passengers only. 8, I said. Same as pickup. Copy that. Weather Service is reporting temperature anomalies in your area. Maintain vigilance over conditions. For the next hour, when Ruth shared details of life in the Creek Valley that no written record could have preserved, the location of a well that had been filled in after the fever, the names of other families who had inhabited the area, tales of Cherokee families who had assisted the settlers. As when Ruth finally rose to depart, the temperature began a gradual return to normal, so subtle that I barely registered it at first. The frost on the windows melted slowly, leaving watery streaks down the glass. "Thank you for listening," she said to Dr. Reagan. "It means more than you realize to have someone care about what transpired here." She paused at the bus door, glancing back at me. "Silas, you're treading a perilous path. The things that accompany you most mean no harm, but there are others in these mountains that crave more than just attention. Be circumspect about who you heed." Then she stepped off the bus and walked back toward the oak grove, dissolving like morning mist until she vanished completely. Dr. Reagan sat in stunned silence for several minutes, her gaze fixed on her notes. Finally, she looked up at me. "Did that just occur? Did we just interview someone who perished in 1892? Before I could respond, one of her team members called from outside. "Margaret, you need to witness this." We disembarked the bus to find the researchers clustered around their equipment. The ground-penetrating radar had unveiled clear evidence of 4 graves in precisely the location when Ruth had indicated, 17 paces from the largest oak toward the west. Within an hour, Dr. Reagan had corroborated when Ruth's narrative through historical records. The 1892 death records for the area listed 4 typhoid fever victims. When Ruth Caldwell, age 19, Thomas Caldwell, age 4, Mary Caldwell, age 12, and Samuel Caldwell, age 7. But those records had been filed in a different county in documents that weren't digitized and required special access to view. There was no plausible way when Ruth could have known those specific details unless she had experienced them. As we loaded back onto the bus, Dr. Reagan's excitement was palpable. "I'm bringing a full paranormal investigation team back here next week," she informed me. "This could be the breakthrough we need to substantiate that consciousness survives bodily death." My blood turned to ice at those words. I recalled the notebook's red ink warnings about researchers and investigations. "Ma'am," I said cautiously, "perhaps it's best to let sleeping dogs lie. Some things resist being studied." But she was already out of her seat, energized by the possibilities. "This is the discovery of a lifetime, Mr. Buchanan. We can't simply disregard it." As I watched her team discuss plans for a return visit, I knew I needed to contact Holcomb immediately. This was precisely the kind of attention the notebook cautioned against. My radio crackled as I pulled away from the curb, but it wasn't Holcomb's voice. It was Willie Hemsley, another driver, and he sounded terrified. "Un unit. I require backup at Cataloochee Creek Cove. Got 12 college kids on board, and something is pursuing the bus. Something that's keeping pace on foot at 30 miles per hour." Holcomb's voice cut in immediately. "Willie, what's your precise location?" "Mile marker 12 on the loop road. This thing, it resembles a man, but it's moving all wrong. Passengers are beginning to panic." Doy's voice joined the radio chatter. "Willie, honey, listen to me carefully. Do not halt the bus. Do not allow anyone off. And whatever you do, do not acknowledge what's pursuing you. The passengers will be fine if you adhere to instructions. Keep driving. Keep them focused inside the bus. Do not engage with whatever's outside." Holcomb's voice was grim. "Silas, I need you to proceed to the depot. We've got a problem." As I drove through the gathering dusk toward the Blue Ridge Mountain Tours office, I realized my second Standard Tuesday was ending with even more questions than my first. Dr. Reagan's investigation team would be returning, bringing equipment and attention that could disturb things better left undisturbed. Willie was grappling with something that required intervention. And somewhere in my pocket, the Cherokee blessing sand was warm against my leg, as if it sensed dangerous times ahead. The real rules weren't just about passenger safety. They were about maintaining a balance that had existed for longer than any of us could remember. And that balance was starting to shift. 3 days after Dr. Reagan's promise to return with a full investigation team, I arrived at the Blue Ridge Mountain Tours Depot to find 3 black SUVs parked in our gravel lot. Like a federal task force had descended on our small operation. The vehicles looked expensive and official, their tinted windows reflecting the early morning Tennessee sky. I watched from the driver's lounge as Dr. Margaret Reagan climbed out of the lead vehicle. Her steel gray hair pulled back in the same tight bun, but her demeanor more intense than before. She moved with the focused energy of someone who'd spent the last 72 hours planning something significant. Following her were 3 people I didn't recognize, each carrying metal cases and electronic equipment that looked far more sophisticated than anything I'd seen on those cable ghost hunting shows. "Mr. Buchanan," Dr. Reagan approached me with a handshake that lingered just long enough to convey the gravity of what she had planned. "I'd like you to meet my team. This is Marcus Torres, our equipment specialist." Marcus was a wiry man in his 40s with the restless energy of someone who worked with his hands. He was already unpacking electromagnetic field detectors and digital thermometers from foam-lined metal cases, his movements quick and precise. Sarah Kim, our photographer and visual documentation expert. Sarah carried multiple cameras, digital SLRs, infrared equipment, and what looked like specialized night vision devices. Her eyes moved constantly, assessing angles and lighting conditions with professional efficiency. And Dr. Elena Vasquez, environmental data specialist. Dr. Vasquez clutched a modified tablet that beeped softly as it monitored air temperature, humidity, electromagnetic fields, and atmospheric pressure. She wore the focused expression of someone accustomed to finding patterns in seemingly random data. "We're going to document everything this time," Dr. Reagan explained, her voice carrying the excitement of a researcher on the verge of a breakthrough. "Voice recordings, temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic anomalies, photographic evidence. Whatever happened in Creek Valley, we're going to study it properly with scientific rigor." Hulk Com stood nearby, his weathered face creased with worry lines I'd never noticed before. He'd been making phone calls since yesterday evening, probably to Charlie Swimmer and other Cherokee contacts whose names I didn't know, but whose involvement made me nervous. The notebook's red ink warnings about researchers and investigation teams echoed in my mind like alarm bells. But I was just the driver. My job was to follow routes and keep passengers safe, not make decisions about scientific expeditions. My regular group for the day was 6 retirees from a Florida RV park, led by a cheerful woman named Betty Morrison who wore a visor decorated with cartoon flamingos. They'd booked the Roaring Fork Motor Nature Trail Tour, a scenic 8-mile loop through preserved homesteads from the early 1900s. The route was perfect for Dr. Reagan's investigation and exactly what I'd been dreading since her phone call. "Folks, we have some researchers joining us today," I announced as everyone boarded the bus. "They're studying the historical sites along our route, so you might see some additional equipment and documentation activities." Marcus had already begun positioning his devices throughout the bus. EMF detectors tucked discreetly under seats, infrared cameras mounted near windows, temperature sensors placed every few feet along the aisle. The retirees seemed fascinated by the high-tech setup, gathering around Marcus as he explained the basic functions of his equipment. "This is like being on one of those ghost hunting shows my granddaughter watches," Betty whispered excitedly to her friend Marge. "Except we're actually here instead of watching it on TV." If only she knew how accurate that comparison was, and how much more dangerous this version would prove to be. The Roaring Fork Motor Nature Trail wound through dense forest, where preserved log cabins sat like monuments to Appalachian life. Massive hemlock and oak trees created a canopy so thick that afternoon sunlight filtered through in scattered patches, giving the entire area an otherworldly quality even on normal days. Our first stop was the Alfred Reagan homestead, where a weathered log cabin and barn stood, surrounded by split-rail fences that had somehow survived nearly a century of mountain weather. The historical marker described a family that had farmed this isolated valley until the 1920s, when they'd sold their land to what would eventually become the national park. Electromagnetic readings are elevated, Dr. Vasquez reported, watching her tablet screen intently. Definitely higher than baseline measurements, and temperature is dropping despite the afternoon sun. That's when I saw him. A figure in faded denim overalls and a wide-brimmed hat, standing motionless by the cabin's stone chimney. He cast no shadow despite the bright sunlight filtering through the trees. And when I blinked hard and looked again, he was still there, solid as any living person. My blood ran cold. After 3 years of driving these routes, I'd learned to trust my instincts about supernatural presences. And this felt different from the usual passengers who appeared and disappeared from my bus seats. "Marcus," Dr. Reagan called quietly, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Are you getting readings on this?" The equipment specialist was frantically adjusting dials and checking displays. "EMF spikes are off the charts," he reported. "Whatever's here, it's electrically active in ways that don't match any natural phenomena." More figures began appearing around the cabin. A woman in a faded cotton dress emerged from the cabin's doorway, her movements slow and deliberate. 3 children of varying ages followed her, their clothing suggesting the early 1900s. An elderly man with a carved walking stick hobbled from behind the barn, his overalls patched and repatched. All of them looked as real and substantial. As real as the living tourists on my bus seemed, but I knew better. The temperature around us stubbornly dropped, a stark contrast to the warm October afternoon, and my breath began to bloom in small, ephemeral clouds. One of the children, a girl who couldn't have been older than 8, walked straight to the bus and addressed Dr. Holcomb through the open window. Her voice was as clear as Cataloochee Creek spring water, yet carried an echo that seemed to originate from a place far beyond her small frame. "Mama says to tell you the fever took us all in 1918, she stated matter-of-factly. "We've been waiting so long for visitors who wanted to hear our stories." Silas's camera began flashing, documenting the encounter with quick, professional efficiency. But a strange phenomenon accompanied each burst of light. Instead of being frightened away or diminished by the camera flashes, the spirits became more solid, more present, the very antithesis of what one would expect from ghost stories. Far from being banished by the bright light, they seemed to thrive on the focused attention. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Buchanan whispered, observing her environmental readings spike with each photograph. "The electromagnetic activity is actually increasing with our observation and documentation." We continued along the trail, pausing at the Noah Ogle cabin, where the preserved homestead recounted the story of mountain life in the 1880s. More spirits materialized here, entire families emerging from different time periods, all eager to share their narratives with someone who would listen and record their words. At the Ephraim Bales place, the spirits of loggers and their families arose from the forest, some carrying translucent images of tools they had wielded in life. Each group that appeared seemed more substantial than the last, as if our attention and scientific equipment were somehow fueling them. By the time we reached the old grist mill near a small creek, more than 20 spirits surrounded the bus. The historic mill wheel, which hadn't turned in decades according to the Park Service, began rotating slowly as a ghostly miller went about his trade, his movements precise and practiced. Alfred had to lower the volume on the audio alerts on his equipment to prevent feedback loops. "Some of these manifestations are showing up on visible light spectrum only," he reported to Dr. Holcomb. "Others are interactive, intelligent, and they're definitely getting stronger with our continued presence and attention." The retirees were a mix of fascination and nervousness. Ruth Morrison kept peppering us with questions about the historical reenactors, while her friend Mary had fallen silent, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrest of her seat. That's when the Confederate soldier appeared. He materialized not gradually like the others, but instantaneously, standing atop the bus. His boots created metallic groans and pops as he walked across the roof, the ceiling flexing visibly under his weight. The living passengers looked up in alarm as dust sifted loose from the interior panels. "Driver," his voice carried clearly through the metal roof, tinged with an accent from another century. "You need to turn around right now. Don't go to the end of this trail." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, recalling the notebook's advice about avoiding interaction with supernatural entities. But this felt different, urgent, like a warning that could potentially save lives. Why? I called back, breaking my own rules. What's waiting there? Something that ain't like us, he said, his boots continuing their slow, deliberate pace above our heads. Something that's been feeding on all this attention you're giving us. Every spirit you've documented, every reading you've taken, every flash of light, it's been watching, learning, getting stronger. Dr. Hulkcom leaned forward in her seat, her scientific curiosity overpowering any fear. What kind of entity are we dealing with? The kind that don't just want to be remembered, the Confederate replied grimly. It wants to consume the very act of remembering. It wants to be the only thing anyone ever thinks about again. Before anyone could pose any further questions, every electronic device on the bus died simultaneously. Alfred's EMF detectors went silent, their LED displays going dark. Silas's cameras ceased functioning, their LCD screens blank. Dr. Buchanan's tablet screen turned completely black, as if someone had pulled the plug on everything at once. EMP-like interference, Alfred muttered, frantically checking connections and battery levels. But this level of electromagnetic pulse isn't possible from any natural phenomenon. Through the windshield, I understood why our Confederate soldier was so concerned. At the end of the trail, near a small waterfall where Cataloochee Creek tumbled over moss-covered rocks, stood something that was painful to look at directly. It towered at least 20 feet tall, with proportions that defied human anatomy. Its limbs bent at angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space, folding and refolding like origami made of shadow and hunger. Its face was the worst part, a shifting blur of features that never stabilized long enough to comprehend. Eyes that might have been human appeared and disappeared, mixed with other sensory organs that belonged to no earthly creature. The longer I tried to focus on it, the more my head began to pound with a pain that felt like ice picks behind my eyes. Nobody look directly at it, I commanded, remembering the journal warnings about entities that thrived on focused observation. Look away. Focus on something else, anything else. But it was too late. The thing had noticed our bus full of concentrated human attention. Researchers with their equipment, tourists with their cameras, all of us focused intently on documenting and understanding exactly what it had been waiting for. It moved toward us with flowing, impossible grace. And as it approached, something even more terrifying happened. The spirits we'd been documenting, families who had seemed so happy to finally have visitors, began fleeing in absolute terror. They scattered like leaves before a hurricane, their forms dissolving back into whatever dimension they'd emerged from. The major entity reached our bus and pressed one elongated appendage against the passenger window. Where the appendage touched, the glass instantly blackened, the darkness spreading like ink blooming in water. In mere seconds, all the windows were opaque, sealing us inside what felt chillingly like a mobile tomb. Then, an even more unsettling event occurred. The entire bus lifted clean off the ground. We were suspended, 30 feet in the air, held aloft by forces that defied any rational explanation. The Florida retirees erupted in screams of sheer terror. Dr. Buchanan was attempting to maintain a veneer of scientific objectivity, though her abject fear was palpable, and Marcus was frantically troubleshooting, trying to coax his equipment back to life. "It's not trying to harm us," Dr. Reagan whispered, her scientific mind still analyzing the situation despite the rising panic. Her voice, though steady, was taut with apprehension. "We're being preserved, like specimens meticulously arranged in a jar. It desires to study us with the same detached curiosity with which we were studying the others." The Confederate soldier's spectral voice echoed from somewhere just outside our mobile prison, though his form was obscured by the completely blackened windows. "Buchanan, now would be an opportune time to deploy that Cherokee sand your mentor, Doy, gifted you." I fumbled in my uniform pocket for the small, worn leather pouch Doy had entrusted to me, my hands trembling slightly as I worked the drawstring open. The sand within glowed with a soft, warm light the moment it was exposed to the air, pulsing gently, almost like a living heartbeat. "Everyone join hands," I commanded, standing tall in the aisle despite the bus swaying gently, suspended by some unseen force field. Form a protective circle around me in the center aisle, right now. You have to trust me on this. The tourists and researchers, without question, obeyed, linking hands tightly as I carefully poured the blessed sand in a protective circle around our group. The instant the circle was complete, the bus plummeted back to the ground with a jarring impact, a bone-rattling crash that shook every piece of equipment on board. The entity's confusion was palpable, a tangible presence even through the blackened windows. Whatever protective magic the Cherokee blessing held, it rendered us invisible to something that hunted by sensing human curiosity and focused attention. We could physically feel it probing around the bus, searching frantically for prey that had suddenly vanished from its perception. Electromagnetic interference wiped everything, Marcus reported, his voice strained as his equipment slowly flickered back online, one display at a time. All our data is corrupted beyond recovery. Every reading, every photograph, every single audio recording. It's all gone. The entity, frustrated by prey it could no longer detect, retreated slowly toward the waterfall. As it moved away, the bus windows began to clear, returning to normal glass that revealed the peaceful forest scene outside, as if the terrifying events had never even occurred. The Confederate soldier reappeared beside my driver's window, his form translucent but determined. "It won't follow you off its home ground," he assured me, his voice grave. "But Buchanan, you tell that Cherokee friend of yours, Doy, that the old agreements are being tested. This thing's been calling to others of its kind, attempting to breach boundaries that have held for longer than white folks have been in these mountains." As we drove slowly away from Roaring Fork, the atmosphere inside the bus was subdued, heavy with unspoken dread. Dr. Buchanan sat in stunned silence, staring blankly at her now useless equipment. All her sophisticated scientific instruments had recorded nothing but static and interference. Her photographs showed only empty landscapes. Even her digital audio recorder contained only white noise. "We can't publish any of this," she finally said, her voice hollow with profound disappointment. "Without concrete evidence, there's no credible study to be had. No peer review board would ever accept eyewitness accounts of something this extraordinary." But I knew the deeper, unspoken reason she wouldn't publish her findings. She'd realized what I'd learned firsthand from Doy's cryptic notebook. Some knowledge was simply too dangerous to share, especially when it attracted the unwanted attention of things that fed on human curiosity and scientific investigation. The Cherokee blessing sand had saved us, but it had also delivered a chilling warning. There were entities lurking in these mountains that didn't just want to be remembered or studied. They wanted to consume the very act of remembering itself. And according to our Confederate soldier, they were growing increasingly bolder, testing the ancient boundaries that had long kept them contained. As we pulled into the depot parking lot, my radio crackled with Willie Hemsley's voice, panicked and urgent, cutting through the static. Any unit, this is Willie. I have a situation developing rapidly at Cherokee Reservation Overlook. 14 tourists just walked into the woods in a trance-like state, all of them talking in unison about old agreements breaking down and boundaries that don't hold anymore. They're saying something's calling to them from deep within the forest. Holcomb's voice cut in immediately, grim and businesslike. "All drivers, report to the depot immediately. We're calling Charlie Swimmer. This has gone far beyond what we can handle with mere rules and blessing sand." The formal investigation might have been over, but I could feel deep in my bones that the real crisis was only just beginning. Whatever Dr. Buchanan's team had inadvertently stirred up was spreading beyond Roaring Fork, reaching out to other entities, other hungry things that had been patiently waiting for centuries for precisely the right opportunity. The Cherokee blessing had saved us today, but tomorrow would undoubtedly bring new and even more daunting challenges that might require far more than just protective circles and ancient wisdom. I parked the bus carefully and helped the shaken retirees disembark, knowing with a chilling certainty that this was probably my last normal tour for a very long time. The call came at precisely 6:23 a.m., piercing through the pre-dawn quiet like a sharpened knife. I'd been awake since 5, sitting on the very edge of my motel bed, staring intently at my hands, which still trembled almost imperceptibly from yesterday's harrowing encounter with the major entity at Roaring Fork. The Cherokee blessing sand sat warm and reassuring in my pocket, a constant and tactile reminder that we barely escaped something that hungered to consume the very essence of memory. Willie Hemsley's voice crackled urgently through my radio, high-pitched with mounting panic. Any unit. This is an emergency situation at Cherokee Reservation Overlook. I've got 14 tourists, all from a family reunion. They came up from Knoxville just yesterday evening. They all just walked into the woods in a trance approximately 20 minutes ago. All of them talking in unison, saying the exact same thing over and over. The old agreements are breaking. The boundaries no longer hold. Come and see what's been waiting. Holcomb's response was immediate, his voice laced with a grimness I'd never witnessed before. All drivers, report to depot immediately. We're calling Charlie Swimmer. This has escalated beyond what we can manage with regulations and blessing sand. I drove through deserted streets towards the depot, my headlights slicing through a morning mist that felt denser than usual. The mountains surrounded Gatlinburg like slumbering giants, but for the first time in my 3 years driving these routes, they felt actively menacing rather than simply ancient and uncaring. Charlie Swimmer was already at the depot when I arrived, standing next to a battered pickup truck that looked like it had been navigating these mountain roads since the 1970s. He was exactly as Doy had described him. A man in his 70s with silver braids that cascaded past his shoulders and eyes that seemed to perceive far more than they should. His weathered face radiated a calm authority born from decades of confronting forces most people never acknowledged existed. The entity you folks stirred up at Roaring Fork has been calling to its kin, Charlie stated without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge passed down through generations. It's attempting to breach the old boundaries that have maintained the stability of these mountains for longer than your people have inhabited them. Holcomb stood beside him, his normally confident demeanor replaced by something bordering on fear. Charlie, what exactly are we dealing with? Something that intends to use those tourists as anchors to establish itself in new territory, Charlie explained, retrieving a canvas bag from his truck, to transform them into permanent observers so it no longer needs to hide in remote hollows. First the reservation, then Gatlinburg, then any place those folks might journey when they return home to their lives. The magnitude of the threat struck me like a physical blow. This wasn't simply about containing supernatural entities in remote locations. It was about preventing them from spreading into populated areas through infected human carriers. Charlie opened his bag and revealed items I'd never encountered before. Carved stones that seemed to throb with an inner light, dried plants that emitted a sweet, almost medicinal aroma, and animal bones etched with symbols that were painful to gaze upon directly. Traditional protections, he clarified. Your blessing sand is effective for personal protection, but sometimes we require stronger medicine. He handed me a piece of carved jade on a leather cord. Wear this. It will aid you in seeing through illusions and resisting the impulse to scrutinize what you are seeing too closely. But remember, Cherokee and white working together is the only way this works. Our ancestors learned that lesson the hard way. The drive to Cherokee Reservation Overlook took us deeper into the park than I'd ever ventured, along roads that seemed to materialize only when Charlie was looking at them. More than once, I was certain we were driving directly into dense forest, only to have a path appear at the last possible moment. Physical laws are more like suggestions up here, not requirements, Charlie said, noticing my confusion. The land remembers different rules, older ways of being. That's what makes it both dangerous and sacred. Willie's bus sat empty in the Overlook parking area, its emergency lights flashing like a beacon. Willie himself sat on the tailgate of a Park Service truck, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm October morning. His face was as pale as old parchment, and his eyes possessed the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had witnessed too much. They just walked in, he said when he saw us, all 14 of them, moving as if they were sleepwalking, but with their eyes wide open. Kids, grandparents, everyone. And they were all reciting the same words in perfect unison. Charlie nodded grimly. The entity's call grows stronger the more people it possesses. Each person it takes makes the next one easier. We followed a trail that definitely wasn't marked on any Park Service map, winding through groves of trees that seemed to bend reality around them. Charlie tossed his carved stones ahead of us as we walked, and where they landed, the air shimmered like heat mirages, revealing paths that were otherwise invisible. Real trails, Charlie explained, but they only reveal themselves to those who know how to look. Your people constructed roads over the surface. We learned to follow the paths the land intended us to use. The tourists stood in a perfect circle in a clearing that felt profoundly wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The trees around us were arranged in geometric patterns that were painful to contemplate directly, and the ground beneath our feet felt spongy, as if we were walking on something organic rather than earth. At the center of the circle stood the entity, or at least a manifestation of it. This one was different from the massive presence we'd encountered at Roaring Fork. It shifted constantly between organic and geometric shapes, sometimes appearing almost human, other times resembling crystalline structures that defied three-dimensional space. The tourists appeared decades younger than they had the day before. Their movements were fluid and graceful in ways that human bodies weren't designed for. They swayed in unison, their voices creating a low humming that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and resonate directly in my bones. "It's feeding them an illusion of youth and vitality," Charlie whispered, pulling more stones from his bag. "Making them feel better than they have in years. That's how it maintains their willingness." He threw the stones in a wide arc around the clearing, and where they landed, the air shimmered and revealed the truth. The entity's beautiful, shifting form collapsed into something that was primarily hungry emptiness, void spaces that pulled at reality itself, attempting to drag everything nearby into whatever dimension it called home. The tourists stumbled as their borrowed youth faded, confusion replacing the serene expressions they'd worn. One of them, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, looked around wildly. Where am I? How did I get here?" The voice, laced with disorientation, belonged to none other than Margaret Henley, instantly recognizable from Willie's description. The Henley family matriarch, the architect of this ill-fated reunion. Stepping forward, I recalled Charlie's wisdom, the emphasis on personal connection. "Mrs. Henley," I began, "your daughter Sarah is deeply concerned. Your grandchildren are asking for their grandma. They need you back, Mrs. Henley." The entity, as Charlie had explained, possessed no power to forcibly detain anyone. Its strength lay in crafting an illusion so potent, so alluring, that departure seemed an impossibility. The key, then, was to offer something stronger to cling to than the mirage it presented. One by one, we addressed the tourists by name, each syllable a lifeline, reminding them of family, of responsibilities, of the lives they had temporarily abandoned in the tangible world. With each soul that chose reality over the entity's elaborate fiction, the entity's grip on the others weakened perceptibly. The entity's very form began to unravel, its once beautiful geometric patterns dissolving into chaotic, swirling eddies, eventually resembling smoke being violently sucked into a void, a dark vacuum. With a sound akin to wind whistling through shattered glass, it imploded, vanishing completely, leaving behind only a circle of disturbed earth, a raw scar where it had stood moments before. Afterward, the tourists retained only fragmented memories of their experience. "Felt drawn to explore," was the common refrain. "Like something was calling me, but I can't quite remember what." Willie was waiting near his bus as we emerged from the oppressive embrace of the forest, but his face betrayed a decision already made. This was his last day. "I'm done," he stated simply, his voice devoid of argument. "This is way beyond what I signed up for. My brother's got a catfish farm down in Mississippi. Normal fish, normal problems." Couldn't fault him. Not everyone possessed the constitution for maintaining the fragile balance between worlds, and that was perfectly acceptable. Better to acknowledge one's limitations than to exceed them and become yet another problem demanding a solution. Back at the depot, Doi was in the process of clearing out her locker. After 15 years of upholding the real rules and mentoring new drivers, she had decided it was time to embrace retirement. Charlie's people have their own ways of recording these things, she said, handing me the familiar duct-taped notebook, the very one that had served as my initiation into the hidden truths of these mountains. He'll safeguard the real history better than we ever could. My route assignments underwent a significant shift after that night. Hulkcom, understanding the weight I now carried, reassigned me to safer circuits. Dollywood shuttles, downtown Gatlinburg loops, places where the most significant supernatural threat was a tourist losing their way in a souvenir shop. The jade piece Charlie had gifted me remained nestled in my shirt pocket, radiating warmth against my chest. A constant reminder that certain knowledge carried with it a profound responsibility. However, I wasn't finished with the mountains. Not entirely. As new drivers joined the company, I became the one who gradually introduced them to the hidden realities of their job. Not all at once, as I had experienced, but carefully, with proper preparation and a thorough understanding of what lay beneath the surface. The job isn't to defeat these things, I would tell them, echoing a sentiment Charlie had shared during our drive back from the Overlook. We're not exterminators or heroes. We're maintenance workers, preventing ancient problems from escalating into modern disasters. Tourism continued as usual. Families flocked from across the nation to witness the vibrant tapestry of changing leaves, capture photographs of black bears, and indulge in overpriced fudge in Gatlinburg. They saw precisely what they expected: picturesque mountains, historic cabins, and awe-inspiring natural wonders. What remained hidden from their view were the fleeting figures that occasionally walked alongside the buses on secluded stretches of road, or the unnerving chill that permeated certain locations, or the unexplained rerouting of specific routes. When unusual sightings were reported, I would immediately contact Charlie Swimmer's grandson, a member of the tribal police force who possessed the knowledge and skills to handle situations that defied conventional law enforcement protocols. When researchers contacted the company, eager to delve into paranormal activities, Hulkcom would direct them towards standard Cherokee legends and settler folklore, effectively diverting them from anything that might awaken genuine problems. The balance held, sustained by individuals like Charlie Swimmer, who possessed ancient, traditional knowledge, drivers like me, who adhered to the real rules, and a system that had evolved over generations to keep ancient entities contained within their designated domains. Occasionally, while driving the night roads to collect late arrivals from the airport, I would catch glimpses of figures lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. They would stand patiently at the road's edge, as still as ancient stones, waiting for someone to acknowledge them or extend an invitation. I would keep my gaze fixed forward, my hands firm on the steering wheel, trusting that someone else was diligently maintaining the boundaries that prevented the mountains from remembering too much. Things like that don't die, Charlie had cautioned. They simply wait for conditions to improve. But as long as individuals like us continued to abide by the real rules, those conditions would never improve. The tourists would return home with their photographs, their fudge, and their carefully curated stories of authentic mountain experiences. The entities would remain confined within their remote hollows, and the delicate balance that had safeguarded both worlds for generations would endure. It wasn't glamorous work. Most days, it resembled nothing more than driving a tour bus and pointing out scenic overlooks to retirees from Florida. But some of us knew better. Some of us carried jade in our pockets and blessing sand in our souls, maintaining a vigil that never ceased, following rules that were not written down, but etched into the memories of those who understood that certain jobs transcended mere financial compensation. The mountains remembered everything, and so did we.